Hello, my name is Kourafalou at the University of Miami. I will discuss how coastal response, in the case of a deep blowout, should take into account the linkages in terms of circulation and transport from the deep ocean to the coast and estuaries through the continental shelf. I will start with what this means for the Gulf of Mexico, where the unique situation is that we have a deep ocean current, the loop current, that very frequently meets the coast near the Mississippi Delta. Then I will give 4 examples of what we have learned during GOMRI, focusing on processes that influence the transport of hydrocarbons. The first example goes back to the deep water horizon. The second example highlights more recent studies around the Taylor Energy Platform. Then in the third and fourth examples, I will illustrate how the Northern Gulf, where response generally concentrates its focus for obvious reasons, is closely connected to areas hundreds of miles away further south. I will finish with a few main points and the publications list. The examples I will discuss are drawn from 2 GOMRI modeling and observational projects where I was the lead investigator. Here are the projects and my collaborators. I would also like to acknowledge collaborations with 2 GOMRI consortia that provide us with additional observational resources. I will start with some background. This image synthesizes satellite and in situ data during the Deepwater Horizon incident and depicts a moment during a brief period, late May 2010, when oil had started to be entrained in the loop current system. At that time, the fear was that oil would travel south and reach coastal areas far beyond the coast near the Macondo well, that is marked here with a black star. The danger was well-founded, as we already knew that such southward pathways do exist. This is an ocean color satellite image, showing exactly that. I will be showing a few more of these images, so I will mention now that bright colors show waters of coastal origin that are high nutrient content, as waters of Mississippi origin, while the dark colors mark the clean, in quotes, loop current. So we can see waters from around the Mississippi Delta traveling in a thin strip along the loop current and getting to the Florida Keys, where we have actually measured them as their fresher waters, and even beyond, along the Gulf Stream. The loop current rotates clockwise, as shown here in this plot of salinity, the background colors, and currents from our high-resolution modeling that I will describe in a moment. When the loop current is close to the Mississippi, and when also a counter-rotating circulation is present, like from this anti-clockwise eddy, it forms an offshore jet that can move river waters, but also oil, if oil is present there, rapidly offshore. This is important for the response, and it is one of the dominant pathways under synergy with currents associated with the Mississippi River plume. Something that many people do not realize is that large river plumes, as the Mississippi, create a circulation of their own, in addition to coastal currents due to wind, etc. This is depicted in this schematic, where we have marked which way the Mississippi waters went in solid lines with arrows, and which way the surface oil patch went in dashed lines during different periods of the Deepwater Horizon incident, changing according to Mississippi discharge and wind conditions. In addition to the offshore pathway that I just discussed, the red lines, we had a westward pathway, blue lines, when oil had an easier time to reach the Louisiana coast, and an eastward pathway, the green lines, when actually the boundary of the Mississippi plume, the riverfront, prevented oil from reaching the coast east of the delta. Again, these are aspects of oil transport and fate that are important for response, and we need to have the appropriate models to predict accurately. Such an example is the model we have developed based on HYCOM, the Hybrid Coordinate Ocean Model, and coupled with an oil spill model from our partners at the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. We call it GOM HYCOM 150, as it contains the entire Gulf of Mexico, GOM for short, at a high resolution of 150 degree, about 2 kilometers. The model domain is shown here. The colors are depths to illustrate how close coastal and deep areas are in many parts of the Gulf with steep shelf break slopes, including near the Mississippi Delta. The model has high-frequency atmospheric and river inputs, all rivers in the Gulf are included, and detailed representation of the river plume and loop current interactions I just discussed. It is embedded in a global operational model and has 7-day forecast capabilities. Here is an example of predicting the position of oil particles, the black dots, during the period of westward currents created by the river plume together with wind forcing. The red line is the boundary of the river plume, and the oil is well confined within the narrow westward coastal current that is dominated by river waters, as also depicted in the ocean color data below. At the right is an example of a modeling experiment to showcase the contribution of the Mississippi River in the oil transport. The top is the oil patch superimposed on currents, the red arrows. This is a good representation of the late May period when oil had started to be entrained in the loop current system, as I showed earlier with data. The bottom is a model scenario where we have removed the Mississippi River from the simulations. As you see, we get a very different picture without the river, meaning that the Mississippi had an important role in the oil transport and freight. My second example is from extensive field work that we did during Gomery, using as a proxy the oiled waters around the Taylor Energy Platform, MC20, marked here. Also very close to the Mississippi Delta, and thus subject to the influence of river-induced fronts, as seen in these images from satellite optics on top and from our aerial surveillance at the bottom. We combined our observational platforms, both in situ and satellite, with drifters and shipborne instruments from the CARF consortium to quantify the transport pathways. I will show examples from drifter data, from the marine radar aboard the University of Miami research vessel Walton Smith, and from our very high-resolution satellite imagery. The left animation shows drifters released within oiled waters at Taylor, the red star, organizing themselves along the major pathways that the Mississippi River plume creates, as we discussed before, based on model simulations. Now we have obtained the data evidence. The animation at the right is an example of the Walton Smith marine radar that maps the currents and clearly shows the change in circulation across the riverfront that is marked with a white line. Our satellite images were derived from very high-resolution data, down to 1.5 meter, that allowed us to map the oil slicks and their progression in the presence of the riverfronts, together with the drifter trajectories. Our analysis included the characterization of oil emulsions. The third example illustrates how we have advanced our understanding of the pathways that can transfer nutrients, but also pollutants, from the northern Gulf to the fragile coral reefs in the Florida Keys, the beaches around Florida, and beyond. We collaborated with the DEPEND consortium to measure for the first time the three-dimensional characteristics of these pathways with both satellite and in situ data, and we showed that we can successfully simulate them with our model. The left panels are from the model, top is salinity and bottom is sea elevation, while the right panels have ocean color at the bottom and high-resolution salinity at the top, extracted from ocean color data with a groundbreaking algorithm. Salinity is a very difficult parameter to obtain such a good agreement between model and data, and as I have discussed, we need to get it right if we want to accurately predict the hydrocarbon pathways. The black line in the top left panel shows the periphery of the loop current, abbreviated as LC, and you can also see it standing out as bright colors in the sea elevation image just below. In sea elevation imagery, the clockwise circulation patterns stand higher, hence the bright colors. You can also see a loop current eddy, LC for short, or ring, that is also clockwise, bright colors, and had detached from the loop current and traveled westward. In this period, we see a loop current that is extended northward, approaching the Mississippi Delta, and we actually see two branches of Mississippi waters traveling southward at the right and left of the loop current. This could be pathways of hydrocarbon transport if this situation occurred during an oil spill. The fact that this scenario did not materialize in 2010 does not mean, unfortunately, that it could not materialize in the future. So we have documented well how the Northern Gulf can impact the Southern Gulf. But can the opposite happen? The answer is yes. And this brings us to my final example in understanding, monitoring, and predicting the Gulf of Mexico to improve our ability to address potential oil spills, among many other benefits. During GOMRI, we identified and studied physical processes in the Southern Gulf, and especially at the entrance of the Straits of Florida near Cuba, that influenced the loop current. I just highlighted the well-known clockwise loop current eddies or rings that detach from an elongated loop current and travel westward toward Mexico. These are large anticyclones, and you can also see one in this image from our visual sea surface elevation data. The ring has detached, and the loop current, marked by this dashed line, is in a southern position near Cuba. We found similarly significant anticyclones associated with the loop current that are more likely when the loop current is in such a retracted position. These eddies also detach but travel eastward through the Straits of Florida. I have named them Cubans for Cuba anticyclones, and they are marked here on the aviso data and also on the ocean color data image. We used model simulations, upper panel examples, and data, bottom example, to show that these Cubans actually played a role in the Gulf circulation during the deepwater horizon by modifying the loop current. Of course, anything that had to do with the loop current evolution in 2010 was an important factor in the oil spill, transport, and fate. The left panels are the beginning of the incident when the loop current, marked by the gray periphery line, was extending northward from model on the top and from ocean color data at the bottom. The right is a couple of months later when the big anticyclonic clockwise ring that was named Eddie Franklin had been formed. We have successfully simulated the detachments and reattachments of Eddie Franklin, and in addition, we have discussed how the Cuban anticyclones played a role in these transitions. I would like to leave you with the following messages that I hope can enhance our oil spill response capabilities in the Gulf of Mexico. The overarching message is that when dealing with offshore and deep spills, we have to take into account both deep and coastal circulation and their interactions. These interactions have to be understood, monitored, and modeled, and we must pay attention to the details. One such important aspect is the fronts induced by rivers, and especially by the Mississippi, which are the result of a circulation triggered by the river itself and modified by other factors like the wind and topography. These fronts can act both as barriers and as guides of oil transport. We always knew that the loop current connects the northern and southern Gulf. The new knowledge is to quantify the southward pathways, how fast, but also how deep, oil or other materials can travel, and to learn new phenomena in the Straits of Florida near Cuba that influence loop current extension and ring shedding and can thus play a role in oil transport and fate for a spill anywhere in the Gulf. The legacy of GOMRI is new knowledge, unprecedented data and tools. We are better prepared to support response with improved assessments and forecasts of circulation and hydrocarbon transport. Everything I discussed today has been published in peer-reviewed journals. Here is the publications list. Thank you.